Hey friends, I'm jumping on here. Last week, or actually not last week, yesterday, there was some problem with the audio file that I use for my podcast. And my guess is it was user error, not technical error. And so it didn't upload right, even though it looked like it uploaded right to me. And so it didn't send. And so I don't have anything like I normally do ready to go. But we are going to do a podcast today. We're going to talk about what does it mean when life gets hard? Because right now, for a lot of people where I'm living, life is hard. And that's without us talking about back to school. Let's kick it off. This is The Joe Martino Show.
You're listening to The Joe Martino Show, a podcast dealing with all things emotional, relational, and human nature. Joe is a licensed counselor in the state of Michigan, specializing in relationship therapy. He is also the author of the book, The Emotionally Secure Couple. All advice offered in this episode is offered for entertainment and educational purposes only. Enjoy the show.
All right, welcome back. So let's just talk about what do we do when life is hard. One of the things that I have been running into people and, I've been talking to people and they're like, man, it is just so hard. I was scrolling TikTok, which, by the way, if you're not following me there, TikTok is I am Joe Martino, a lot of little shorts from the podcast. Looking to expand that content this fall. But I was scrolling TikTok and a girl that I know her parents better than I know her, but she's my daughter's age. She came up and literally, it was just post after post after post about how the last, 2-3 months have been hard. I was talking to a guy last night who told me, 2024, I just feel like it's been a fire. And a lot of us were like, man, I'm ready for 2023 to go. I'm looking forward to 2024. And I think I've told you before, one of the conclusions that I came to a couple years ago was every year has its challenges. Every year can be hard. Every year gets to be a difficulty of events that comes. And yet there are years that are harder than other years. There are years that are more difficult than other years. There are years that bring more distress to us. And this year, for a lot of people that I know, it's hard. And then we get to this question of, well, what does it mean to chase happiness? I was talking to a client and there has been a lot of this, right? Like, hey, tell me the things that are important to you. And typically what they do is they list, well, I want to be happy as number one. And then they give me 2 or 3 or 4 more things. But really it's one of those 2 or 3 or 4 more things, or maybe all of them, that they think will make them happy, they think will bring them happiness. And of course, the inherent danger there is if we're chasing happiness and we think it's outside of us, if we think it's something that has to happen in order for us to be happy, when life gets hard, it's going to be very difficult for us to find peace and joy. Because as you know, I believe that happiness is the byproduct of contentment. Happiness is the byproduct of peace. And there really isn't an option to have a life that doesn't have stress. There isn't an option to have a life that doesn't have hard things. Next week, we're going to be airing my interview of Cindy Clemenshire, who was sexually assaulted when she was younger by a friend of the family who is also a pastor who has gone on to pastor a very large church, be very popular. And her life had difficulties directly because of that. By the way, don't forget to tune in for that and make sure you subscribe for that. But, her life, when you go through a trauma like that, your life is going to have bigger difficulties. It's going to have different difficulties. It is going to have things that come into your adulthood that don't come into your adulthood if you weren't assaulted as a young teen, as a 12-year-old into your teen years. But even people who didn't go through that as a child have difficulties. Even people who didn't go through some sort of trauma or assault as a child they have difficulties. And there's two things that I've been talking to people a lot about. When we pursue happiness, one of the dangers is that when life gets hard, we will soothe with counterfeit tools to try to find happiness in our lives. We will try to find happiness, right? We're going to chase it. And if we can't chase it, or if when in chasing it, we can't find it because life is getting hard, we will soothe with counterfeits. And this happens. We see this all over our world. We see this through the obvious addictions, right? People who are fighting drug addiction, people who are fighting alcoholism, people who are workaholics, people who are always chasing the next dollar, people who are always chasing more. Really what we're chasing, what they're chasing, and I use the word we because let's be honest, probably to some extent this is true for all of us. What we're chasing is happiness. And we can't find it because we're not chasing contentment or peace. Instead, we're going to use these artificial soothers. And so what happens is when life gets hard, we're at much more of a risk to try these artificial, these saccharine sweet sweeteners, as somebody called them once, right? The things that don't actually satisfy, the things that don't actually bring us happiness, we're going to be tempted to use them because we hope that they will help us feel happy, especially in this time of distress. And as some of you know, because you're local listeners, or, and even those of you aren't, I brought up last week about how, there's a lot of grief going around in my little town. My neighbor's son, 18 years old, passed away in a car wreck 2 weeks ago. Last week at this time, his funeral was happening at the time I'm recording this because of the problems with the feed that I had, re-recording it and going to drop it on the same day. A lot of grief comes with that, a lot of hard feelings, a lot of hard questions. And one of the things that we always want to avoid is this idea that we have all the answers. I don't have all the answers. I don't know why that happened. I don't know why such a young man who was so friendly, who had so much of life in front of him, why that would happen. I don't know. And I can still find joy in not knowing. I can still find contentment because I don't have to know all of the reasons for why something happened in order to have contentment, because contentment is a choice. Contentment is not external, it's internal. Peace is not external, it's internal. And I can choose peace even when it's hard, even when things with my business, right? So we have the very serious, very meaningful, high consequences. This happened to my neighbor. And then it's something that is also pretty serious, right? When life gets hard in my business, that's how I feed my family. That's how I pay my bills. That's serious, but not quite as consequential as the loss of life. Not even close, right? But I can still, when life gets hard, I can still choose contentment. And there are two things to this. It's really interesting to me. The first part is I have to accept, and this is intellectual. I have to accept that I don't necessarily have to understand everything, and most of the time I won't. That's an intellectual component to being content. The second component is actually physical, and it's action. It's doing things. It's moving forward. And it's moving forward regardless of how I feel. It's just picking my feet up and taking one more step. It's going and saying to my friend, hey, do you need to talk? Can we sit down? It's going and moving forward. It's engaging in activities of life. It's engaging in things that have to be done, right? Engaging in activities that bring me joy and bring me happiness, that bring them to my doorstep, if you will. So in just a few weeks, I'm very excited about this. I'm going to be out in the woods engaging in some hunting. I love being out in the woods. I'm going on a trip with my wife. Those are things that bring joy to my doorstep. Now, we use the phrase, they bring us joy. And I understand why we use that phrase, but it does have some problems. That phrase does have a few issues. One of those issues is that it can be brought to your doorstep, but you still have to walk out the door and engage. You still have to walk out the door and move into the process. It's a little akin to the phrase, you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. Only instead of drinking, right? Like the joy can come to your doorstep, but sometimes we don't open the door. And I was talking to somebody who was like, yeah, I think I'm getting better because I'm starting to actually do things with my friends more. I'm actually engaging with my friends more. Well, yeah, that's great. That's movement. You're doing good things. And so when life gets hard, there's one of the things we have to do in the intellectual components, we just have to accept sometimes there aren't good answers. And that's okay. And originally I was going to talk about what does it look like to go back to school and, not having good answers for that. And that's something I'm hoping to bring my wife on to do that. I have one recorded for that if I can't get her on. And that's not quite the same thing. But to be honest with you, we do a lot of things with schools that I don't really understand. Why do we do it this way? I don't really know. But those are the things that we have to get done. I have to go to work. I have to pay my bills. Right? I have to do certain things. I have obligations and responsibilities. But what about the things that I don't have to do that are just good for my soul? Hanging out with friends, exercise, eating right. Those are the things where when we get discouraged, when we get depressed, we tend to give those up. We tend to push those away. And when we're in a time of distress, and last week's episode was called Living in a Time of Grief. And maybe this is Living in a Time of Grief 2.0. You have to live your life when those things happen. You have to engage the things that are life for you. All right, that's what I got. Not a lot this week. Obviously, I had to make a decision. I thought about just not putting up an episode this week. What do you do when life's hard? How do you find joy and peace and happiness? You have to start with two components. You have to accept that we're never going to have all the answers. And then we have to engage life physically, regardless of how we feel. What about you? What have you found that helps you when life is hard? Let me know. Send me an email, Twitter at me, X at me. I don't know what that is anymore. But send me an email. If you know my number, text me. If you don't know my number, reach out to me some other way. Find me on Facebook. Find me on Instagram, I am Joe Martino, or TikTok, I am Joe Martino. Don't forget to come back next week and listen to that interview. And I think we're going to kind of weave some episodes this fall into that topic, sexual assault and the church, sexual assault and our kids, sexual assaults, and how do we do it? Like, what do we do as parents to look out for it? One of the most common things is it's not as often adult on minors. I mean, certainly that happens, and it happens way, way, way too much. But one of the things we run into in counseling a lot is it's peer-to-peer, right? So 10 on 8, 11 on 9 years old. And there's really not a lot of recourses legally. And what does that mean? And how do we do that? What does it look like to take those things serious? Thanks so much for listening. We'll catch you next week.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share with a friend. And hey, give us that rating in your podcast store. Until next time, change possible.